But today is the first part, which is a reading and analysis of the play. I'm going to talk about these three books that I put up here. And you'll see on the screen. Most of it is introductory. Most of you probably have read the Odyssey, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but ask questions if you like. Then I'm going to talk about the author of this particular work, Odysseus, and then I'm going to introduce the work, Odysseus. And next time, I'm going to cover the first part of the play, which is in two parts, and the last session is the second part of the play. So today you don't need the books, but if you'd like to follow the other two, it's a good idea to have them and to read the play. So, this is what I'm doing today. Homer's Odyssey, Nikos Kazantzakis, and Odysseus, which is a verse tragedy by Kazantzakis. So, I'm starting with the Odyssey. And this is just a summary to refresh your memories and to show you what Kazantzakis is doing with the Odyssey. The Odyssey was written in the 8th century, around 725 to 675. It's an epic, it's a poem, a verse poem of 12,000 plus lines, and its meter is dactylic hexameter, which is the meter used for epics. Both the Iliad and the Odyssey were written in that. And it's divided into 24 parts, which are referred to as books. They're actually just chapters of about a reading that takes no less than an hour for each book. It's in 24 parts, probably because it was first put on papyrus, and if you put too much on it, they bend and they break. So it took 24 of those rolls to place these epics, but also the Greek alphabet has 24 letters, and each book is represented by a letter. So that's why both epics have that. Although both epics are about the Trojan War myth, which occurred long before Homer got to it. Actually, the date that is usually used for the Trojan War is 1186, which is the 12th century, and Homer is composing in the 8th century. So a lot of what he's saying is hearsay. There were no written records at the time. It was an oral society. So a lot of it is invention. It might have some historical significance, although we're not all that sure. Schliemann, who dug up Troy, claims there was a Troy exactly where Homer's stories take place, but then there are 8 levels of Troy that they've discovered since then. So now they're not sure which level might have been the Troy we're talking about. But both epics, the Iliad, which is about 50 years before the Odyssey, and the Odyssey are on the Trojan War myth. But Homer only uses a part of the myth for his stories and alludes in flashbacks to other parts. The Odyssey is only 40 days during the period that he's talking about, but it takes Odysseus 20 years to get back home. So during those 40 days, we learn what happened during those 20 years. Okay, this is the Odyssey that I have right here. This is the translation I normally use, which is Richmond Lattimore, who was a professor at Bryn Mawr College. And the Odyssey is in 2 parts. The first part is what's going on in Ithaca, which is Odysseus's home. And the second part is what happens when Odysseus finally returns to Ithaca. And usually the Odyssey is read in 4 books at a time. And there's a reason for that also. It lends itself to 4 books. They're complete units, but also it was believed that when this epic was performed, it took about 4 books per performance. Because linguists have worked this out, it takes about 2.5 hours to recite 4 books, which they believe was about the time that a performance lasted. And as I said, each one is a unit. The first 4 books are on Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, and his adventures. He's out there searching for his father to find out if the father is alive or dead. The second 4 books, 5 to 8, tell us about Odysseus. Where is he at the time that we start reading the epic? He has already completed all his adventures, and he's in a place called Phaeacia, where he's telling his adventures to the king who is hosting him. So that's where we learn about Odysseus in books 5 to 8. And 9 to 12, referred to in Greek as the apology, which means the adventures. Odysseus recites in his own voice his adventures to the king. And there, of course, you can have a lot of fun with that because it's Odysseus reciting his adventures, and we know Odysseus is a great liar. So how do we know what he says is even true? Or is he embellishing his adventures for his own good? So that becomes very confusing and interesting. That ends the first part. And then the second part, he has arrived in Ithaca in disguise as a beggar. So books 13 to 16, he goes to his shepherd's hut, Eumaeus, who is his swineherd, takes care of his pigs, and he's a very faithful servant. So he goes there in disguise, no one recognizing him in the Odyssey till much later, and that becomes a big issue in scholarship. When does recognition occur? And different scholars have different opinions, but the modern scholarship says that he is recognized early. But if you read anything below the 60s, he's not recognized till the last books of the Odyssey. So there's a lot of controversy there. So in Eumaeus' hut, he feels things out. He tries to find out from the swineherd what's been going on, what's going at his palace, etc. Then in books 17 to 20, he decides to visit the palace as a beggar, to beg. And while doing that, he can feel out what the suitors are doing. His wife Penelope is being pursued by 108 suitors and are forcing her to marry. And this has been going on for the past 3 years out of the 20 that Odysseus is away. So that's what happens 17 to 20. And 21 to 24, Odysseus reveals himself, kills the suitors, puts his house in order, and they live happily ever after in the Odyssey. But that's not the whole bit, because Odysseus doesn't stay home. But Homer doesn't go there. He stops with the killing of the suitors and the recognition of his wife, which, as I said, older scholarship says that that's when the recognition occurs. Recent scholarship says that he could be recognized as early as book 14, definitely by book 19, and there's an argument about that. So that's the Odyssey. And this is what Kazantzakis is using to write the present work. Nikos Kazantzakis is a Greek author. He's the best known Greek author. You see his dates up there from 1883 to 1957, so I guess he was about, 74 years old or so when he died in Germany. He hardly ever was in Greece, although he was a Greek author. He was everywhere else but Greece, and he was very prolific. He's best known for his novels, which is the genre that he least thought much of, but he could make money from writing novels. Zorba the Greek, The Last Temptation of Christ, Christ Re-Crucified, those were even made into films. He started writing dramatic works, like the one we're talking about today. He did 18 of those very early. And then, immediately following that, he wrote some philosophical works. So he's known, even in his novels, basically as a philosopher. He's trying to show something, to prove a theory throughout. Many travel books, because he traveled all over the world. 2 books of poetry, hundreds of articles, dozens of school texts. That was to earn money so he could continue writing, and translated Homer's Odyssey and Iliad into modern Greek, translations that are still used today in Greek schools. They're very poetic translations. So that's Kazantzakis. Okay. Now, these are the books I'm interested in. This is the play. It's a verse tragedy, as he calls it. It's in verse, not in prose. And he wrote that in 1922. But actually, it was 1914. You see how early he was interested in the Odyssey. It was 1914 when he read an Odyssey by a German author, Gerhard Hauptmann, who wrote a play called The Bow of Ulysses. And if you read that play and you read this play, you can see the similarities. He liked it very much. As a matter of fact, he wrote this play in memory of Hauptmann, dedicated to Hauptmann. So he wrote it in 1922. And later, in 1938, he expanded this play into an epic, this book here, which he called the Odyssey, just the Odyssey. And he continued where Homer left off. But it was 3 times the size of Homer's Odyssey. It was 33,333 verses when he finished in 1938. So from 22 to 38, he was involved with the Odyssey. And he was interested. In between, I put a year later, in 1923, he published a very important small work called Askitiki, which means ascetic exercises. And that was the beginning of his philosophy, which he then incorporated, having written the play, writing that philosophical work, he incorporated it and expanded it all into an epic, the Odyssey. It was the Odyssey of his was translated in 1958 by this man here, who used to be my teacher or mentor, Timon Fryer. And for a time, it was the only time that a poem became a bestseller, because it became the Bible of the flower children of the 50s and 60s. There were 150,000 copies sold, which is an amazing thing for a poem, which usually doesn't even reach 1,000. So this was the Odyssey, and it was called, to distinguish it from Homer, the Odyssey, a modern sequel. So, Homer's Odyssey, these books only take up 13 books, 13 to 22. You see, they focus on the last part of Homer's Odyssey. And from 13 to 22, there's more emphasis in the very early books than the later books, which are mentioned. This little book that we're talking about today stops at the moment that Odysseus reveals himself and gets ready to kill the suitors, draws his bow, and the play ends. The bigger Odyssey of Kazantzakis begins where Homer leaves off, book 22, and continues with new adventures. So the only thing they do with Homer is book 22, although there are references to other things. The small play is in two parts. Part one takes place in the courtyard of Odysseus's palace in Ithaca, and the second part takes place in the hall of the palace where we meet the suitors for the first time. This is the way now the verse tragedy, the small book here, this one, is set up. Part one, as I said, and this is interesting because you begin to see what Kazantzakis is trying to do, is Ithaca by Aphrodite's chapel. And it's interesting that he uses the word chapel, because remember, we're setting this in the 8th century, but there's a Christian element to it. So he's modernizing the story and bringing up to the present, and he's using Aphrodite as some kind of a saint. So the first part is mostly on Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love, Venus in Latin, which shows that Ithaca is chaotic. It's going over to the senses. It's looking at Aphrodite as a god. The second part, in the palace courtyard, the emphasis is on Athena as the goddess. Although she's been pushed aside by Aphrodite, all of a sudden in the second part, her chapel flame comes to life. It's been dormant for all this time because Aphrodite has taken over.
Who's she the goddess of? Athena?
Athena is the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of reason. So what we have here is the rational Athena versus the irrational, the mind versus the senses. And that's where Kazantzakis' interest comes in. So the first part, what we have in the play, if we divide it up, the various scenes, you have maids, many of them made up by Kazantzakis. They don't appear in the Odyssey because he has a half a dozen or so milling around the palace, doing their work, and they're discussing the fact that it's almost 20 years, the anniversary of Odysseus' 20th year away is coming the following day. And there's a prophecy that says that Odysseus will return to Ithaca in the 20th year. But nobody believes it up to this point because they think after 20 years, he left as a young man, he's probably dead by now, he was killed, no one has heard anything of him, so nobody really cares. But it's in the back of their mind that he could appear. So that's what the maids are talking about. And that's where Penelope comes in, who reveals her present situation. And her present situation is that in the Odyssey, she is told that the moment that their son Telemachus sprouts a beard, that is, he's old enough to be a man, she should think of marriage. Because if the husband has not returned by that time, he probably will never return. And Penelope sees that. She's under a lot of pressure to marry someone. And in Kazantzakis' play, she also wants to marry. She's been alone too long, and she doesn't mind. She wants to make out as if she's very faithful and she's waiting, but she hopes that something happens, and she even has somebody in mind. She likes Eurymachus, who is the second suitor. There are two leading suitors, Antinos and Eurymachus, and she likes Eurymachus. So she's talking about that, and she's come to Aphrodite's chapel to give some flowers and put something there in honor of her. That's when Odysseus all of a sudden appears as a beggar. And in Kazantzakis, the beggar is always identifying himself, but nobody believes him because he does it in jest. He says, I could be Odysseus. I could be anybody I want. And he goes on this way throughout. All of this happens at Eumaeus' hut. And in time, Telemachus, who has been on his journey looking for his father, returns. And he goes to the same hut because he has been told that the suitors are going to try and kill him because they're afraid that since he's old enough now, he would be the heir to Odysseus's fortune, and they want him out of the way so they can marry his mother and take over the kingdom. So he doesn't go to the palace, he goes straight to the hut. And in Homer's Odyssey, that's where the recognition between son and father takes place, but not here. Here it appears at the end. Telemachus throughout the first part doesn't know who this beggar is. All he knows is that he's a very unusual beggar. He seems to know a lot more than a beggar should. So that's the first part. In the second part, we now go to the palace. Odysseus is there as a beggar. We're first introduced to the suitors. As I said, there are 108, but Kazantzakis only deals with about 5 or 6 of them. He only mentions 5 or 6. So when Eumaeus brings the beggar to the palace, he goes around introducing himself to the suitors. Then at some point Penelope meets the beggar. That in Homer is very interesting because that's when that occurs in book 19 of the Homeric Odyssey. And that's when Penelope and Odysseus converse, and modern scholarship says they recognize each other. As a matter of fact, there's evidence when you read the Odyssey very clearly and slowly, you see that they do have signs between them. And it's at that point that Penelope says in book 19, why don't I hold a bow contest using your bow? And Odysseus turns to her and says, do it, lady, don't delay, as a beggar. And according to scholars, that's the moment that they recognize each other. That's why Penelope sets up a bow contest, because she could have done it any time before that, but why at this particular moment? And it's interesting that they hit on the bow contest because the bow was in vogue when Odysseus was a warrior 20 years ago. But nobody knows anything about bows 20 years later. They don't use them anymore. So those that tried to bend it will not be able to because they never used a bow. He's an expert at it, so he will be able. So they're confident that they can get away with this and he can get rid of the suitors. That's in Homer. In the play, Penelope never recognizes her husband. She has a very small role in it. She just thinks he's a very unusual beggar that shouldn't be around anyway. And recognition comes at the very end. Even Telemachus doesn't recognize his father, but at some point, Telemachus says, you know, I had enough of this. It's time that I take over and do something about it. And Odysseus, the beggar, turns to him and says, if you don't know your father by now, he's in you. And if you don't know who he is by now, you never will. So act. So Telemachus has come of age to take over. And he sort of recognizes that this man might be more than he claims to be. And at the very end, there is this recognition. Odysseus takes the bow, bends it, and the play ends. And we assume he's killed whoever. So that's the play. The important thing is the final two lines of this tragedy: "In my ponderous hands death brings peace like a thunderbolt in the hand of justice," are the last words of Odysseus. And the big book, the Odyssey in 1938, begins "and," as if you're continuing. "And when in his wide courtyards Odysseus had cut down the insolent youth," and continues. So you can see that this is a precursor. The play is a precursor to the larger Odyssey, and just continues from that. So Kazantzakis is working out his ideas from the very beginning, 1922, all the way through 1938. And this is important, and I put it up here. This appears in the larger Odyssey because I think it explains the philosophy that Kazantzakis is after. In Book 15, the big Odyssey is also divided into 24 parts. In Book 15, there is this particular quotation about a pear tree, which says, "A wild, twisted pear tree blossomed in the sun. All year she fought the elements with gallant spite, the rain, the frost, the whirlwinds, and the cankering worm. Yet in her bark had slowly spun her pears with patience until she trembled like a bride and broke into flower. Joy filled the pear-drenched mind of the quick-tempered man, and for long hours until the evening shadows fell, he admired his far victorious sister wedged in rock, who took what fate had given, water, soil, and stone, and stubbornly in sun turned all to subtle flower." And that's what he's basically trying to do in the Odyssey. That's what he's saying about fate, that man has a fate that you can't do anything about. It's kind of pessimistic fate, but you have to struggle. And through your struggle, you can even win over fate, till you can get rid of all the senses and come to complete freedom. It's a Nietzsche philosophy, actually. It's a pessimistic philosophy. It's a nihilistic philosophy that he has, but he tries to show this through these works. Now, the small book, the play, hasn't reached that point yet. It's still a Homeric Odysseus that we're talking about, but you can begin to see the change that's occurring in that Odysseus. He's trying to shed himself of his past, which is a very sensual past. When he talks about Circe and Calypso and all his adventures, there are things that he wants to push aside, to leave aside, and find some kind of freedom. So what he wants to do is to deny Aphrodite, who has taken over his palace, and rekindle the flame of Athena, which has been put out by the suitors, because they're now worshiping Aphrodite. And you see that throughout. And it's Aphrodite in the play that suggests the bow contest, not anyone else. And she suggests it because she wants Penelope to marry. She wants there to be a mate for the woman. She doesn't want the woman to be left alone. And she's forcing Penelope to make a choice. And since she's visited nightly by Aphrodite in dreams, etc., she has come to the point where she feels she has done without a man long enough and she needs somebody. So she's waiting for the contest, but she can blame Aphrodite. She says, the goddess calls and I obey. And so we're waiting for that to happen. Now, with this thing, there's another one that follows a few lines later where the pear tree responds to Odysseus. And I have that. The tree addresses Odysseus. How long shall I deign to guide you, fool? No matter how you boast, disdainful man, or strive to shake your yoke, you'll still plod, shackled, round and round man's threshing floor. Accept your fate with no false shame, and you'll surpass her. What else did you expect from the rank of herd of men? Their hearts are air skins, their brains mud, their loins manure, but yet I love them. And like the stench of earth, I know well how the spirit blooms, how God is shaped. What filth my black roots browse on in the darkest gloom. See how I milk the rock, suck up manure, and turn all into flowers with patience, with despair, with love, and how I stand firm in your path, a blossom pear. Behold me, take me for your model, start your work. And that's the final philosophy. In the Odyssey, one of the themes is to endure. The gods always say, if you can endure, the gods will help you. If you give up, they're not going to. And Odysseus is the man of endurance. He takes everything that comes out to him, that's given to him, and he endures till he reaches home and takes over. Here, the work is also to endure, but in a different sense. That you have to take what fate dishes out, and you have to struggle as much to get rid of all the body seeks and wants till you reach complete freedom. And that's where we're going with. But he uses, Kazantzakis uses different words that I have up here that's interesting. In the Odyssey, one of the main themes and words that is used throughout is the word Odysseia, or Aditi, up there in bold letters, capitals, which means excellence. Because in Homeric culture, the important thing is for a warrior, first of all, it's a warrior society at the time, and the most important thing is to try and achieve some kind of immortality, which is impossible for a mortal to achieve. So the only way immortality can be achieved for a mortal is to be remembered by the generations unborn, which will keep him alive in the minds of people. And in order to be remembered, you have to achieve great deeds, which means you have to excel in war, in battle. And in every chapter of the Iliad and the Odyssey, we have a book dedicated to the Odysseia, which means the excellence of the particular warrior that is being given emphasis in that particular book. And that is how many people, how many of the enemy they kill, how they kill them. That gives them excellence, because once you kill a warrior in battle, you receive whatever that warrior has to give. That might be gold, might be his spears. That's called yenis. That means material things. And depending how much material you have accumulated, shows your worth. So the more material you have, the more gold you have, the greater you are, the greater your fame. That's why in the Odyssey, when Odysseus is coming home, he has amassed great wealth from the 10 years he has been fighting in Troy. That is, he has slaves, he has all kinds of things. But during his journey, which takes another 10 years, he loses it all. Now he finally lands on Phaeacia, on this island, where he meets the Phaeacian king, who is going to send him home finally, but he has nothing. And if he were to return to Ithaca of nothing, he has no fame. He's nobody. So it just so happens that the Phaeacian king is very wealthy, and it's the custom of a host to give something to their guests, and this king gives him 3 times the wealth that he had originally bringing back. So you have to find a way in the story of loading him up this way to show that he's a great warrior. So he does reach home with a whole pile of gold, which they pile in Ithaca when he lands, and that's where he meets Athena as a shepherd, whom he mistakes as someone that wants to rob him. And then there's all kinds of things going on. But the emphasis on aristia is very important, excellence. The phrase that is used most often in both epics is the best of the Achaeans. Who is the best of the Achaeans? Which means who is the best of the Greek warriors. And first you look at Achilles, then you look at Diomedes, then you look at Agamemnon, Menelaus, Hector, etc. We go through all of them, and there's a book dedicated to each of these men showing what they do, how they fight, etc. When you come to Kazantzakis in the book, that word aristia becomes andria, which means manliness. And it's not what you do to show your excellence, but how you look at your fate. That's the manliness. In English, it's usually referred to as the Cretan glance. And there's even a book called just that, The Cretan Glance, that talks about all this. So this Andria is developed through this play. It begins in this play, but it really doesn't come out till you read the larger Odyssey. And that's where he puts the emphasis, trying to explain what this manliness is, how you handle fate, what do you do with your fate. And you know from the beginning that fate is against you, but you have to fight it. And the way you fight it shows your manliness. So that's basically what you have in the play that Kazantzakis begins to develop till years later in the Odyssey you reach this thing. And at the very end of the big Odyssey is that you shed everything that has to do with bodily needs, and you become pure spirit. But it still ends on a very pessimistic note, because one of the famous quotations in the Odyssey that summarizes this is, we are born from an abyss. We end up in an abyss. And in between, we call it life. That's pretty pessimistic and nihilistic. So, in reading the play, what we begin to see is how Odysseus changes. You notice when he comes back, when he first returns, he is talking about his past experiences. This is in the play. And what he's saying throughout that first initial speech is how he has shed his interest in the sensual. and that he was very much for it, and he is no more. And he's the enemy of Aphrodite. And throughout the play, he works it so that he can bring Athena back into power, whom I said her flame on her altar has been erased, done away with. Now, this is another piece of how Kazantzakis reaches this philosophy. He says that his purpose in the play is to reconcile the luminous and dark forces which exist in a state of war today and attempt to divine the future harmony, how to bring these things together and reach some kind of harmony. And he claims that there are three ways, there are three steps that one must take or could take to reach this. The first one, which he rejects outright, is the way of flight, which means the way of the imagination, to imagine the story, to write the story. He rejects that. It's the other two that work. The way of disintegration. That's what he uses in the play. And that means to break down our beliefs and our interests in the senses to kind of come to an understanding of what is soul. That's the way of disintegration, to disintegrate our beliefs so that we can come to something beyond that. And the final stage is integration, how you integrate all of this to become pure soul. And the final thing is freedom, which really is not that much of a freedom either, but you divorce yourself from anything. He's always in search of not who is God, but what is God. That's another way of looking at it. He's always searching for this. And all of this begins in this play, but it hasn't resolved itself. So you don't see it as much in the play as you do when you finally reach 1938 and you start looking at the epic, which gets quite confusing, but because it's mostly philosophical, and where he tries to tie in all the modern ideas of the 20th century, existentialism and surrealism and all other movements, because Odysseus leaves Ithaca finally, the moment he kills the suitors, he leaves Ithaca and he tries to find meaning by going throughout the world and questioning. The first thing he does, he decides if he fought for Helen for 10 years, he deserves her, so he goes and abducts her and takes her for himself. And then follows that throughout and comes through various philosophies. He meets Buddha, he meets Christ, he meets Nietzsche, he meets another philosopher that he was very interested in called Henry Bergson. So it becomes more philosophical than just a narrative, a story. So that's what we have, and that's what this play is about. Now I'm going to stop for questions so I can elaborate on anything you might want. This is just a very brief summary. So, my friend, yeah.
I seem to like to lead the pack.
That's good.
Costas, one of the things that I couldn't figure out or make sense of is why the recognition is delayed. Kazantzakis delays the recognition so much. I mean, the only early recognition is early when early stages of his visit to the palace. His dog recognizes him. What does he do? He kills the dog.
Yeah, that's another interesting part, yeah.
So what role does in the change of the whole recognition factor play? Why is that done?
I'm not quite sure. I think, though, that first he's being very ironic and sarcastic throughout, more so than in Homer, because he's constantly telling them who he is, but in a way that they're going to take him as a fool. At the beginning, he says the first words out of his mouth when he comes to back to Ithaca is, "I am Odysseus." That's how he starts out. And that's because he hears the maids who are doing their work, thinking of what if Odysseus will return since his 20 years are up on the following day. And they're talking what would happen and all. So when the beggar comes in and hears it, says, "I am Odysseus." But the way he says it, they take him as a fool. And then he goes on to agree with them. The part with the dog, Argos, in the Odyssey is a very touching scene because it's the first living thing that recognizes him, and the dog has been waiting 20 years for his master. The dog has been abused, which is a symbol of the abuse that has been going on in Ithaca all these years. And the moment the dog sees him, wags his tail, and dies. And Odysseus recognizes him and turns his face and sheds a tear, according to Homer. In the play, when the dog stands up or recognizes him, Odysseus chokes him to death. So he won't give him away. So I guess he's trying to remain incognito till he can get to what he needs to do to get rid of the suitors. He doesn't want any recognition from anybody. And also, there's the idea that recognition should come from him saying who he is. Those that count should recognize him when they come of age to know, like the comment I made when Telemachus says, "I've had enough of this nonsense, I have to take over." That's the point where Odysseus says, "Now you're ready. Now if you haven't recognized your father yet, you never will, because your father is in you." So it's not a question of him saying, "I'm Odysseus." You have to be able to stand up on your own. The father is in the son. And it's not that Telemachus does what he does because he recognizes the father, it's because he comes of age. So I think it's something like that, that the author is trying to emphasize. Gail?
In the original Homer version, does Odysseus leave?
Is what?
Does Odysseus leave after he kills all the suitors?
No.
What's
Odysseus,
the point of killing all the suitors if he doesn't kill
because the suitors want to take over his palace and they want to marry the wife only because they want to take over the palace. Remember that Penelope by now is a middle-aged woman. It's 20 years later, and let's assume they were in their 20s even. Telemachus was a child, a baby, so he's about 20 years old now. She's probably over 40, and most of the men that are vying for her interests are much younger than she is. As a matter of fact, Telemachus says to the main, in Homer, Telemachus says to the main suitor, Antinous, "I remember playing with you." So he has to be maybe 30 or in his late 20s. And they want to marry Penelope, not out of love or because they want the palace. And in order to get this, he has to get rid of them. Now, once he gets rid of them, then there's the problem of the relatives. What are they going to do? And the very last books of Homer's Odyssey have to do with that, with the relatives. They must have heard of the slaughter going on, although Odysseus claims that a wedding is going on. He covers it up that way. But the relatives do learn about this. So in the very last book, after everybody has been killed, after he has revealed himself to his wife, and they get together again, he goes to his father, who is retired at a farm Laertes. And there he plots for the relatives of the suitors who will follow. And they do follow a day later. So along with his father, his son, and the person taking care of the farm, who is someone that's close to him, close to Odysseus, they stand off, the relatives. And the moment they begin to fight, there's a thunderbolt from Zeus that says to Athena, who is there, stop this, no more war. And Athena goes up to Odysseus and says, you have to stop the battle here. You cannot fight anymore. Zeus demands it. Everybody go home. And everybody goes home. And that's the end of the Odyssey.
So
Steve?
a simple question.
Yeah.
This man comes home, if he announces who he is and people recognized him, would he not have had supporters? Was it actually necessary to kill all of these people?
He has some supporters, but a new generation has taken over. Most of the supporters, like Mentor, who was the man that was supposed to be taking care of his estate, are old by now. And it's this new generation that wants to take over the kingdom. So he doesn't have all that many supporters. That's why he wants to do everything in secret, remain a beggar to the last moment, bolt the doors, as they do at the very end, kill the suitors, pretend while they're cleaning up the blood and the gore, pretend that there's a wedding going on, so people from the outside won't know what's going on. And after a day or so, when he visits the farm, then things pick up and the suitors, the relatives follow.
So it's
To do
essentially a
away.
way of reestablishing his power.
Yeah, a step, and then as the myth goes, he gets bored and he leaves, but Homer stops before that. John?
But I thought in response to Athena's role, I thought Mentor was Athena, wasn't Mentor
They
Athena?
take, gods never appear as themselves. They have to come to people in the guise of somebody else. So many times she takes the form of Mentor, other times she takes the form of somebody else, because if they appear in their true form, just like in the Old Testament, you burn up. And that's what happens with Athena when Zeus meets Athena's mother, who was Metis, which means the mind. She has him promise that, all right, you had your way with me, now I want to see who you are. And he says, you don't want to go there. But she insists. So he appears to her, she burns to a crisp, and the moment she starts to burn, he swallows her whole, and then from his head pops Athena, with whom she was pregnant. So that's what happens when you see gods. Yes, Barbara?
Why does Zeus wait so late in the story why doesn't he prevent the destruction of the people who are trying to wed?
The suitors.
Yeah, the suitors.
Because according to the gods, they have to stay out of human affairs as much as possible. I mean, he keeps telling the other gods, like Apollo and Athena and Ares, who is the god of war, don't interfere. Let them take care of their own business. They're just spectators.
It would shorten the story, too.
Yeah, so it would. So that's the reason there. They have to come to their own realization.
I'm curious about how this rewrite of the original Homer's Odyssey became accepted in Greek society, in children's books and things. Why was it necessary to rewrite and reorient that from the original?
Yeah, it's not so much as rewriting as, in most cases, it's continuing. Like Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote the famous poem Ulysses, where he uses Ulysses as a symbol to describe something that is more contemporary about man. That's why James Joyce wrote the novel Ulysses, where he uses a contemporary character, Leopold Bloom, as a symbol of what has happened to man in 20th century. He's gone from an epic hero to a pathetic little character who has to leave the house so his wife can have an affair with her singing instructor, and he can come back.
Is the language more accessible of the continuations compared to the original for?
No, the original became so famous, the story that everybody knows, that writers used it for their own purposes to continue the story, to make comments on their own age. Dante does the same in the Inferno. He uses Ulysses, Odysseus, as a man who belongs very deep in hell because of what he did, of his lies. But Homer uses those lies at the time that Homer is using Odysseus' lies. It's a positive thing because it's a way of showing how he uses his mind. How else can you get by the Cyclops, who is 60 feet tall? Weapons don't help anymore. And it also shows you the transition between a warrior society in the Iliad and coming to another, a more advanced society, where you're saying that weapons don't always solve everything. You have to use your mind along with them. And in the Odyssey, which comes after the Iliad, you begin to see this. Odysseus has all those weapons that he's bringing from Troy, but they don't work with the Lastrygonians, the giants. They don't work with the sorceress Circe and Calypso. You need other things, and the other things are the mind. And the mind is shown through the kind of stories that he's able to create to escape from those difficulties. But in later times now, after the Odyssey, those stories become lies. And in a civilized society where you're dealing with other people rather than giants, they don't work as well. They become negative. So other writers write stories that show this. It's a way of using something known to talk about something new. Linda?
No, now that you mention that, the great contemporary of Kazantzakis also found his home with Ulysses. And the fact that both of them wrote massive works, pulling that figure from the ancient times, was always surprising to me. I mean, we had alternatives, but it was Ulysses that they landed on.
Yeah, those are the two largest and most important works in the 20th century, Joyce's Ulysses and Kazantzakis' Odyssey, that use the myth of Odysseus. But it's, if you were to count the authors that have used this myth in poetry and all, it's huge. It's in poetry, it's in the novel, it's in various plays, where they use this symbol. The Nobel Prize winner, Derek Walcott, who won the prize, about 10, 15 years ago, for his book Homeros, which means Homer, where he sets Achilles and Odysseus in the Caribbean islands, where he's from. And that was a big, a new way of presenting, trying to talk about contemporary society. So he just becomes a symbol of every man. And they look at him in various ways from different angles.
I have another question.
Yeah.
I mean, I take it that you felt Penelope was a minor character, but I want to... hold on. How many more? That's it. But I take it that she is the new face, as Helen was the face that launched 1,000 ships, but she's the new face. She becomes the prize. She becomes that which is desired and cannibalized.
Where?
in Kazantzakis' Odyssey, and that she also is conflated with Aphrodite in that she becomes her alter ego. So, I mean, I see her as a much more central factor, but of course, there's a gender identity for me here. So did you want to tell me why I'm wrong?
Penelope doesn't have much of a role in the play that we're concerned with. Her role is very small. She's a dupe of Aphrodite. She wants a man, and she can say that Aphrodite made me do it. She's really the one.
Oh, okay.
And she follows her.
I agree with Linda. I think she's much more representative and kind of speaks to modern women having needs and desires and not necessarily just when you're 20 that you want a man.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's exactly, she has desires.
That she's, supposedly she's being visited by Aphrodite.
Yeah,
Tell her it's okay, you've waited 20 years and you're still desirable. And I think that's a message to all women.
but it's interesting that in the play, when Aphrodite says all these things, it's Penelope saying Aphrodite says those things. It's not Aphrodite saying it. It's Penelope speaking, says, I saw her in my dream, and she said to me, go take the bow down and let whoever bends it be your new husband. Well, did she really? Did she dream it? Did she say this? That's how he complicates, the author complicates the situation, and that's what Homer does too. Why does Odysseus, in those books from 9 to 12, tell his own adventures? Whereas the rest of the Odyssey is told through a narrator. That is, Homer is telling us the story. But when you come to Odysseus telling his adventures, he has Odysseus tell his adventures. So that brings up the question, is he doing it for gain, or is he really telling the truth? Did all those things happen the way he says they happened? Because in each case, you notice that he comes out as the hero of the situation. He kills the Cyclops, he gets away from the Lastrygonians, he does what he does with Calypso and Circe. It's always, he's on top of those things. So it leaves that open for discussion, and that's what makes the story interesting, because it leaves these things open. Kazantzakis tries to do the same thing when it comes to Penelope. Everything she tells us about the goddess saying to her comes from her own mouth, from Penelope's mouth, not Aphrodite. So it's something to talk about, to discuss. I mean, that's why these things are interesting, because they're written that way. Any other comments? Yes, Charlotte?
I think there has to be some reason why he comes back as a beggar, where as a successful warrior that he apparently was and had a pile of riches, he deliberately chooses not to reveal that. And what does that say about the society who receives him and dismisses him because he's a beggar?
He's using his mind again. There are 108 suitors. They're all warriors. They're all princes, not only from Ithaca, but from all the surrounding kingdoms surrounding Ithaca. And they all want a piece of the action. They all want this rich kingdom, which is Ithaca. And the only way to get it is to marry the queen. So they have to get rid of the son, who would inherit the kingdom, and they have to get the queen. So they decide that she can select from among them, because otherwise a battle will break out between them, the suitors. So they all decide, okay, we'll let her choose, but she has to choose one of us. Now, when Odysseus comes back, he says it much. At one point, Telemachus in Homer says, how can we, just you and I, take care of 108 princes who have their own armies, who have their own men, etc.? It has to be done on the sly. So he decides, after he sizes everybody up, that the best way is to set up a contest where everybody has a chance. Whoever wins will get the woman. They have a chance to do it. He's not saying, and the beggar, being a beggar, cannot take part. But at the very end, after everybody has tried to bend the bow and they can't, somebody suggests in jest, one of his own people, let the beggar try. It'll be fun. You can laugh a little at him. But the moment he gets it in his hands, he bends it and shoots the first arrow at Antinous, who is the main suitor, kills him, and then he exhausts his arrows, killing people. In the meantime, they've taken all the weapons away from the walls where they appear and put them away. He had his Eumaeus, the shepherd, and another good shepherd, a goat herd, put them away. So the suitors are left without weapons, and he just systematically kills them all, so he won't meet any resistance. That's in Homer.
What about all the women who were sent upstairs?
The women early on were, Telemachus done this, says, take the women and don't open the doors, just stay behind till we tell you to come out. And he has the older woman, Euryclea, who was Odysseus' nana when he was young, tell him who has been faithful as a maid. 10 of them were not faithful. They were making out with the suitors. So he has those 10 hung.
What was wrong with that? They're being women.
That's what Margaret Atwood in her novel called Penelopead makes a case. Why did he kill those women? He was wrong in doing it. But that's a feminist report. Homer and the classical period that we're talking about is a patriarchal society. Women have no part in it whatsoever. So they don't count in the Iliad and the Odyssey, unfortunately. But later on, that's when people want to extend the story. People say, well, why? What's wrong with this? And they take up the women and they talk about the women. Even the professor from U of P, Emily Wilson, who recently translated the Odyssey, takes a feminist point of view and she can't change what Homer says, but she can insinuate certain things, as she does, to emphasize the women a little more. So that's why you have to watch what translations you read. Anything else? Okay, well, next time we're going to read the first part of the play and just go through the readings, the characters, and say more about these, each one, why they do this, etc., leading up to our second phase of this project, which is I guess I can't get it back up. Oh. Here. The second, which is a workshop, where Linda is using some tapes from Shakespeare's, what is it, a workshop on Shakespeare?
The Royal Shakespeare Company's workshops, yeah.
Tapes for the director of that, Barton is his name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Barton takes certain passages and kind of analyzes them and reads them, and we want to do the same with taking passages from the Odyssey, a tragedy, and trying to read them in various ways, and you get different meanings by the way that you look at them and read them. And that will eventually lead to the third part in May, where we can stage this in the auditorium and do a reading. So anybody ready to be an Odysseus, please be present, or a Penelope, or a Telemachus. We've cut down, we produced a script from the play. The play is about 150 pages, but the script is only 40 pages. And we cut down the characters to 7, I think, in all, 7 characters. So there will be a reading with 7 people reading the different parts, which gives a view of the entire play with selected passages. Okay? That's it. Thank you.
Does anyone have a little horn at home that I can borrow right now, like a tutor? We're doing a play reading at 1 o'clock and we need a bugle, but I don't expect to have a bugle. Does anyone have a little horn, and a New Year's Day horn I can borrow? Kazoo.
Pretend,
All
John.
right.
Pretend, just go.
Okay, Gordon will be charged of that.